Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos The Brief. It's our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Molitzis. I am here with Carrie Alaveld, and today we are going to talk messaging. Our guest is going to be Jennifer Fernandez Acona. She is the co-founder, VP of Way to Win, which is a group that brings together progressive donors and organizers to work for a more progressive America. And Carrie, this is sort of your beat. This is like your passion, and you've really been focusing on that Republican message and Donald Trump message. And you and even I've been writing about how it's so dissonant to the American mainstream. They seem to be trapped in that world and they can't get out of it, or don't want to get out of it, or don't care to get out of it. And we've had Jen on the show several times, actually. She's a friend of the show, friend of mine, going back politically. And
yeah, we threatened to make her a co-host. Remember at the last year after we'd had her on for like 4 times, we were like, we're secretly going to make her a co-host and she doesn't know it. But we didn't do it. Not yet.
Go ahead. And she's been great to really sort of break down what kind of messaging works, what messaging doesn't work. And in fact, I say we bring her in right now and she's ready to go. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for joining us. You're just talking about how great you are and how you're going to be our co-host here pretty soon. It's our evil long-term plan to rope you in. And I think the last time we talked, and correct me if I'm wrong, was it right before the midterm election when we talked about Joe Biden closing on a message of democracy? And I know Way to Win had also really hit that theme. And all the pundit class and the chattering class, they were like, oh, you should have talked about the economy. Like, what a missed opportunity. And they totally got it wrong. Like, am I misremembering? Or was that about right? Jen, how do you remember this?
That is how I remember
Jen
it.
might have framed it a little more subtly, but I think she's probably going to agree with you.
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely. It was when before the midterms, we had really been pushing in all the message we're doing that we have to make this election about something really big. It's a big contrast between these MAGA Republicans who want to take us backward. And we have all these issues that are popping up, from abortion to democracy to other issues. We can actually tie them together when we talk about our freedoms and how we need to protect our freedoms. So that's absolutely what we did. And actually not only seeing the results and being surprised, outsmarting the pundits and what they were predicting in terms of our downfall. We actually did a post-election battleground poll as well in several states to see, okay, what did voters say actually motivated them to vote for us this time? And what we found was, while voters will always say the economy is their top issue, no matter what, they'll always say that. It just will always happen. We actually asked them a forced choice. Okay, if it was economy, abortion, and democracy, which were all issues that they had said were important, what would you choose first? What was most important? And or how would you rank them? And what we found is that voters who are Democrats and voters who are independents both ended up saying that, taken together, the issue of abortion and the issue of democracy, which we tied together with that freedoms messaging, overtook their concerns actually about economy and inflation in this particular midterm. So it really was a winning strategy to tie those two things together, make that more salient. And I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about the economy. I mean, you've heard me talk about that too. That's another thing that we also do have to address. Voters in this poll we also saw do not trust Democrats to manage the economy, even though we have gotten so much better results than Republicans when they are in charge. So we have to fix that too. So going forward, I see it really as a both and, that we have to thread that needle.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so Civics had a poll, a pre-election poll that made it pretty clear that even though the economy was like a top 5 issue, or, even a top 3 issue for across the board, that Democrats were putting, I'm pretty sure, abortion as their number 1 issue, and independents were putting democracy as their number 1 issue. It was a very, very similar feel to what you're saying. I can't cite it from memory exactly, but I remember being really clear that all the people who saying democracy is not on the ballot were just flat out wrong. I tell you, so what we've got now I'll just say that this walking and chewing gum at the same time is something that we're definitely seeing from the White House, right? Because Biden, easy mistake to make. I hear people on NPR do it too. I'm like, I get you. So, but President Biden, when he announced his candidacy, he put out this sort of 30, or maybe it was a couple minutes, sort of values ad or values announcement of his candidacy, and it was very values based. And then he went out immediately after that and went to like a union hall in Washington, D.C. somewhere, and was doing a total economic pitch, right? Which is this back and forth of doing the values-based thing on freedom, which he's very much owning the word freedom, and then also doing these more localized things on events on the economy. And one of the reasons he has to do the localized events on the economy is that he can't seem to get national press to pay attention to that. So he's got to go to local places, because once he goes locally, the state newspaper, the political newspapers, the locals newspapers cover it. And that's important in terms of that particular swing state that they send him to. But anyway, so we've got this thing, this dynamic that they're trying to play out between the freedom you're talking about and also the economy. But let's go ahead and listen to the first minute of his first ad. This is not his announcement, but it's the first minute and a half ad that his
Joe Biden's,
Joe Biden,
his re-election
put
campaign
out. And I would like to hear what your takeaways are from that after we listen to it. This is the first ad he put out for his.
As the sun rises, we raise the flag, a symbol of all that we hold most dear as Americans. Courage, opportunity, democracy, freedom. They're the values and beliefs that built this country and still beat in our hearts. But they're under attack by an extreme movement that seeks to overturn elections, ban books, and eliminate a woman's right to choose. Joe Biden has made defending our basic freedoms the cause of his presidency. The freedom for women to make their own health care decisions. The freedom for our children to be safe from gun violence. The freedom to vote and have your vote counted. For seniors to live with dignity. And to give every American the freedom that comes with a fair shot at building a good life. In small towns and big cities, we raise our heads, our eyes, our hearts for America, for the idea of this great country. Joe Biden is running for re-election to make certain that the sun will not set on this flag. The promise of American democracy will not break.
Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue.
Okay. Goosebumps?
I loved that ad. When I saw it, I thought it was incredible. Such good storytelling, leading with values. It really, people need positivity and uplifting narrative, like we've talked about. It really feels like it's including all of our coalition in it. It doesn't feel like one of those white swing voter ads that only shows people like throwing hay bales. It actually shows a diversity of America, and it really gives you that feeling in the tone that it has. And it's so important to connect the idea of, like I was saying before, freedom, to use freedom as a value. You heard that repeated throughout the ad. That's the kind of thing we need. We need repetition in order for this kind of message to break through. So the way that they were connecting book bans and attacks on democracy, January 6th with the abortion rights, those are the connections we need people to really understand, to get, again, understand the stakes of this election as well in 2024 in the same way that we did in 2022, which was the only way we were able to overcome these historic headwinds and all of the media narrative telling us that there was no chance we could do anything in the midterm. So I was very happy, because honestly, a lot of the language was actually, felt like it was very much echoing a lot of the ads that we had made throughout 2021 and 2022. It's like, yes, that's what we need to do. That's what we were urging. And it feels like the president's reelection campaign really embraced it. And it's exciting to see that kind of success and how, people with a real multiracial coalition, progressive lens can kind of influence influence like an actual mainstream message.
Oh, that might have been fun to compare one of your ads from last, because I remember that, right? I mean, and you have the formula, which we've talked
The
about,
formula. Yeah.
which is to have that value, that overarching value, to have a villain, and he talked
Yeah.
about the MAGA extremists, and then
Yeah.
to make you the hero
hero.
of your own story, right? Like you can do something
Yes.
about this, and they are absolutely following that, and so I'm sure part of it is that success. You know, like if have we not won the midterm election, maybe it might have been a different
Yeah.
sounding ad, but
Yeah.
it is
It worked.
exactly what you have been preaching and what you've been talking for a
Mhm.
while. So it's got to be very validating.
It's very validating, yeah, to us and to so many other partners who have also been preaching this and taking up that mantle throughout the whole lead up to the midterms. As far back as 2021, we were pushing some of these messages, especially about the extreme MAGA, GOP, labeling them that way, making them a villain, all the things you so succinctly talked about, Marcos, the formula that actually works. And it wasn't something that we necessarily felt was getting picked up when we were in 2021, and it's true that I think the success of the message that we were able to help push, and so many candidate campaigns also successfully pushed, it helped show, I think, this larger ecosystem of what is the winning message right now. And especially when we don't know who the nominee is going to be. Of course, we think it will likely be Trump. On the other side, we don't necessarily know. We don't have a nominee for the GOP. That message is evergreen. Like, it should apply to any of them. It does apply to any of them. You can tie any of them into that, whether it's Trump or DeSantis or some other random like thing that might pop up. But right, like, that's what I think is really powerful about it, because it pins them into a narrative that is really helpful for us, and it's sort of agnostic of whoever the nominee might be.
I love the word freedom too. I mean, partly because it's something that the Republicans have thought they've owned for the longest
Totally.
time, but also because you can apply it across the board, just like you're saying, you can apply it against Trump, against DeSantis, against whoever it might be. You
Right.
can also deploy it in favor of just about anything. So
Right.
reproductive freedom. They said in there, the freedom of our children to feel safe from gun violence. And
Yeah.
that's such a, like, I've been thinking about that forever. Don't we have the freedom to not be like bullied by gun violence every time we walk out into a public square? And
Yeah.
they applied it really nicely there. And that should be a freedom. That should be a freedom to not be worried going out in public and, your kids getting shot or taking them to school, etc.
Mhm.
But, I also wanted to ask, so you said that you felt like this kind of wasn't getting picked up in some ways in 2021. Did you feel like, I mean, the DC class of
Mhm.
Democratic consultants, right, are
Mhm.
very specific, and they're not always a quick study. I'll just say that. So, they've been hanging on to the Clinton triangulation for 2 decades now.
Yeah, it's like old habits die hard.
Old habits die really hard, and those old habits made them a lot of money, which is why it's so hard to let go of it.
Mhm.
You think that do you get the sense that they're more open to it now, or do you think that I almost said the Obama White House, oh my God, living in 2010. Do you think the Biden White House is just more open to it than the DC, political class is, the Democratic political class? Is there a chance that his messaging people, his polling people are actually have some, degree of separation that gives them a little bit more independence when they go about formulating their strategies?
And just to sort of contextualize that question even more, is what I mentioned earlier, is that class was vicious at Biden for not wanting to talk about high gas prices and inflation. And we're like, why would we want to highlight the one issue that seems to be resonating for Republicans? Like, no, you change the subject, talk about other things. But it was deafening. I mean, everybody assumed that he had made this ginormous mistake by focusing on democracy and as a closing message. And the voices, those of us who were arguing the opposite, there weren't many of us, and nobody in seemingly like positions of big power, except whoever made the decision in the White House, which I guess is the most power. So yeah, so it's an interesting, yeah. Where did you feel that I just just to finish out Carrie's thought, right? I mean, it did seem that we were shouting in the void, but we weren't. Do you have any sense of what was happening?
Yeah, I mean, I will say in the early days, coming right off of 2021 of the insurrection itself. I mean, we many of us who watched that happen felt very clear right away, and we knew we had to do research, but this has to be something that we can use to wedge Republicans and build this, anti-MAGA coalition that we know is more than just us hardcore progressives. It includes more moderates, it includes suburban people, people who even are Republicans who don't actually want that kind of MAGA future. So we knew that it could be a wedge, but there was a resistance when we started talking with folks on the inside those committees and the consultants. There was a resistance. We had great allies. We had other allies like folks at other groups that we weren't even considered progressive, but were kind of Democrat aligned groups who were kind of saying the same thing as us around using extremism. But there was just resistance to going with a hardcore message about extremism, about MAGA GOP. There was a whole effort that actually Naveen at the Center for American Progress Action Fund pushed on the idea of MAGA, like that really should be what we call them. And at first, when people aren't, people are like, no, we can't say MAGA. That's too weird. Like, people resist certain ideas, but ultimately, I think we just kept pushing. So many of us, not just us, so many of the Partners Research Collaborative, Anat Shanker, Osorio, and all these message gurus who were out there saying, like, look, here's what the evidence says. We can call them this. We can call them MAGA GOP. It is helpful to bring in January 6th as a proof point. And then it really helped when the January 6th hearings were executed the way they were in the summer so beautifully. They were well done. They did a good job really with that messaging, which folks like Anat were actually part of shaping, right? So like we knew that was an important moment, and it did, I think that helped to shift the overall environment as well, where it's like, okay, yeah, I can see that this could be actually a useful strategy to call this out. So I would say that. And the other thing I would say is that for sure there's independence, and that's one of the challenges actually, is the way that all these different groups, whether it's the White House, in the presidential, which is with the DNC, the DCCC for Congress, the DSCC for House, they all have their own different message strategies and different consultant sets that they work with. So they don't always connect, and so that's a good thing if there's independence for the Biden and the presidential team, but it can be a bad thing when the message actually then isn't in lockstep across the board. And we've seen that in some of the research that we've done on just the TV advertising. We did a big study in 2020, and we're about to release our next study on 2022 is going to come out tomorrow. So you guys can look at that. And but it shows some movement. In 2020, there was almost nothing. When you looked at the word extreme in 2020 Congress ads, there was almost nothing for the Democrats calling the Republicans extreme, but the Republicans calling the Democrats extreme. Actually, it was like that was what was happening, and there was almost nothing, even though Trump was on the ballot, right? And so in 22, that was like almost flipped, and you really saw a huge increase in Democrats calling out Republicans as being extreme, and it was because of abortion that enabled them to do that. So just that's a little preview, but it actually, we did see that kind of progress. So I think that's also really good, and it makes does make me feel good about the work to continue pushing for this coordinated, integrated, progressive messaging.
Nice. I mean, I'll give the Biden White House one thing, which is sometimes they don't start out in the right place, but they oftentimes get there. So that's really helpful. And even better, in my opinion, they started out in the right place with their reelection announcement.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I'm wary of the time. We only have about 10 more minutes with our esteemed guest. And so let's move on to Trump at the CNN town hall, where he talks about the debt ceiling, and he's like just a jerk. But anyway, let's just go ahead and watch the clip and get Jen's reaction to how that's going to play for Democrats.
Mr. President, you think the U.S. should default if the White House does not agree to the spending cuts Republicans
Well,
are
you
demanding?
might as well do it now because you'll do it later. Because we have to save this country. Our country is dying. Our country is being destroyed by stupid people, by very stupid people.
You once said that using the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge just could not happen. You said that when you were in the Oval Office.
That's when I was president.
So why is it different now that you're out of office?
Because now I'm not president.
The U.S. defaulting would be massively consequential for everyone in this room, for all Americans.
You don't know. It's psychological. It's really psychological more than anything else. And it could be very bad. It could be maybe nothing. Maybe it's you have a bad week or a bad day. But look, you have to cut your...
Could be nothing. Could be, hey, you know what? Not having food on the plate is just psychological. If you just change your perspective a little bit, that could be a glass half full situation.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Anyway, sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
No, it's unbelievable. And while, that whole thing was really a lot to watch, what we are seeing is that this message that he has on the default is actually hurting him and hurting the Republicans because, people are not really paying attention to this default question as much, but we are finding that when we can tell a story about what it would actually mean to default, people do understand that it would be very catastrophic for themselves. They're the ones who are going to be paying that cost. So for him to be so cavalier about it, for him to show how when he was president, it was fine, but it doesn't make sense to people. And so that clip is actually pretty damaging for him and the GOP. One of the things that we're looking for in this whole default question and fight right now is, how can we move voters' opinions so that they actually blame the GOP for even the threat of a default? Because that is going to help us in our effort to oust them in 2024. So that's a really important metric. In addition to looking at how do we get them to have Democratic approval, we really want that voters to blame the GOP because no matter what happens, they should be blamed for even promoting the idea of this. So the other thing that I'll just share is we are also looking at how can we actually take some of the ideas that we just talked about around MAGA Republicans pushing an extreme agenda. They're taking away your right to abortion. They want to end Social Security and Medicare. Their new extreme is trying to force us to default on our debt in America. And this would lead to economic catastrophe, wipe out your retirement accounts, delay your Social Security checks. That kind of really concrete, this is the consequence of what would happen, and tying it and saying they're doing that all to protect tax loopholes and for the super rich and corporations. That's what they're actually protecting. That looks like it's a strong message for this moment right now, and it is something that you would say in response to that Trump clip or someone talking like that, like Trump was talking.
So you talk about how it's a poor message for the Republican Party. Is there anything right now that is working for them? Because from all indications, they're doubling down on policies that cost them a midterm election that they should have won in a landslide fashion. Mm-hmm. And they don't seem to either care or they're trapped in the bubble. And so they're just doubling down on the anti-abortion, this woke stuff that I don't see it working. Maybe you have data that says something. Is there anything at all that may play to their benefit at this point?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And what I would say is that what plays to their benefit, honestly, is the fact that they have had a 40-year head start on the idea, see some basic fundamental ideas about society, about government. What we hear when we listen to voters talking to us right now, when we ask them about some of these economic questions, we still hear sort of parroted back talking points around, well, Biden's programs caused all of this inflation, and it's just for lazy people who don't work that hard, who want handouts. That's like Milton Friedman stuff, that goes really way back. It's a deep cut and it's still there. Even in our own voters, talking to Latino voters in Arizona and Nevada, swing states. I'm not talking about deep red states like Mississippi. I'm talking about purple states, Latino voters actually saying some of that stuff in focus groups. So it does give you a sense that why they can win is because they are reinforcing every time they say, if Trump even said it, every time they say, well, it's because everything is ruined because of inflation and everything the Democrats are doing, it's spending, spending, spending. So they say spending, they say inflation. They said that all throughout the midterms. That was what almost all of their ad spends were about. They really drill that in, and it reinforces just a deeply held belief that we ultimately need to shift in people,
Yeah. I'm just spitballing here, but it makes me wonder if there's, especially now, because now is when you start to build a narrative that you can build on that opens up other narratives down the road, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's an ad to be made or ads to be made that argue that everything changed on January 6th, right? You could even make you could even make a piece about the Republican Party and Ronald Reagan and say, Ronald Reagan's Republican Party did some good things or whatever. I know everybody's gagging who's a progressive Democrat right now, but it was I don't know, it was morning in America. People were optimistic or whatever. And then and you build, and then you say, and everything changed on January 6th. And then you have Trump saying, the party was run by stupid people and idiots. And, and then if people get in their craw that everything changed on January 6th, that opens up everything. Who's better at economics? Who's better at, you can make, you was like, I know that people used to think that Republicans were better at economics, but that all changed on January 6th. Like Trump over, I'm just spitballing, but it seems like that was such a cataclysmic moment for the country that you could argue that suddenly everything changed and then have a bunch of things that you could build off of that. Just food for thought, Jen. I'm just trying to tell you how to do your job. That's what
I love all the ideas. I love it.
Yeah, we need to bring you back because one of the things I'd really love to talk about, and we definitely don't have time in these next 3 minutes, is just that brand, right? It's that sticking brand where people in West Virginia will not vote for a Democrat no matter what, and there's literally nothing you can say, nothing you can do, nothing that can change their minds, and there has to be some movement. And I know people have tried over the years, but it's been sort of that micro targeting where you're gonna, like you said, it's some farm guy, hauling hay, and so that would be a really interesting topic for a future conversation. And we have a couple minutes left. So is there anything you want to close with?
Well, I think I would just close with, I do have a lot of hope that regardless of how we frame it, like, Carrie, your idea is interesting. There's other ideas too, but we really have not tried to fully sell a narrative that helps people understand why Democrats are better for the economy and that can connect back to some of these other issues, because the race and gender issues are important. We can't just talk about kitchen table issues and ignore the fact that the kitchen table has expanded and people are talking about lots of things at the kitchen table, and especially with women and families, it matters. So I guess I just have hope that we can connect this idea of freedom, whether it's, freedom to thrive is something we're with around an economic vision, and connecting back to freedom to have, kids when you want to have them, and democracy, live in a democracy where your vote is counted. So I think I think that we're there, and all the work that we did before is now at this place where we need to build it again going forward. But it feels hopeful and exciting that we'll actually get there.
Jennifer Fernandez.
Biden said that in his ad, the freedom to everybody for everybody to have a fair shot at a good life, the freedom to thrive is what you're talking about. So, there's places to build. Sorry, I interrupted Marcos. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you interrupted the closeout. So that was okay. So Jennifer Fernandez Ancona is the co-founder and VP of Way to Win. Jenna, thank you so much as always. I can't wait to have you back to continue this discussion. Always a pleasure.
I look forward to it as well. Thank you both so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah,
Carrie, I'm curious if we've talked about rural Democrats and trying to win the rural vote, and we've had what's his face on the show a couple of times last couple of years.
Oh, Matt Hildreth.
Matt Hildreth. And so I'm curious. We should
of rural organizing. For whatever reason, every time we have him on, I develop a problem that I never otherwise have of not being able to say the word rural.
Rural.
I don't know.
Rural.
Yeah. See.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but
go ahead.
I'm curious what his take would be on that ad and how he thinks that might resonate if you strip out the partisanship. I know there's this problem where once there's a D attached to a name, and we've seen this time and time again. We actually have seen polling where you'll poll two candidates and people will overwhelmingly in rural areas choose the Democrat, but once you mention, oh well, that's a Democrat, boom, they go the other direction. And I don't know how. I'm blown away by how great that Biden ad is, and it really is a marked departure from the typical Democratic ad. And to see that sort of innovation from the presidential level and that sort of bubble up from lower campaigns, and I'm not talking like blue state Democrats who can say whatever they want and there's no consequences, but in competitive races, Democrats have been afraid to use that kind of aggressive language. They think that they need to be sort of kumbaya, bipartisan because they want to win independence, and that sort of waters down that message. And Biden himself began his campaign in 2020, 2019, whenever that campaign actually began, by talking about how one of his strengths was his ability to work across the aisle, thinking that was like a big winner. And now this is like a 180, complete 180. And it's exactly the kind of message that we at Daily Kos have been angling for a long time, right? It's not about saying just Democrats are bad and F those guys, but it's about really creating this sort of broader narrative that why it's imperative to support the Democrat. And it's not about specifically the issues, it's about this core organizing value, and this value, the fact that Republicans handed us freedom on a platter is the biggest gift to the Democratic Party. Once upon a time, you could run that ad 10 years ago and it would be perfectly applicable as it is today. But people would have rolled their eyes at that point, including Democrats, because I wrote a book that said much of those things, and people rolled their eyes at me, saying that I was being alarmist.
You were too soon. Yeah, you were too soon. So, I mean, I think there is an argument that everything changed on January 6th. I mean, that was a moment when Republicans had a chance to kind of right the ship. They had spent 4 years making excuses for Trump, letting Trump be Trump, just not calling him out. And they could have, Senate Republicans could have found the 17 votes to convict on the,
Mitch McConnell flipped the switch, they would have had it.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they had a chance to sort of redeem the party a little bit there, to make that, to finally cut Trump loose, right? And then they didn't. They doubled down on just being well, if we just let him stick around a little longer, we could still get his votes. And who cares about the moral rot that's permeating the whole party. And so, I think arguably that is a moment when everything changed. I mean, so one could, of course, argue, well, 2016 was the moment everything changed when he got elected. But for the Republican Party, this is where there was just at that point that they didn't take the opportunity to convict him, that they didn't take the opportunity to say January 6th was wrong. They attacked the government. More lives could have been lost. That was a moment when the Republican Party just decided to go full fascist, full cultist, etc. And I will say, the idea of MAGA Republicans was probably helpful for Joe Biden, because I think Joe Biden has spent the last, the first 3 or 4 years of his in office, 3 years in office, realizing, and he said as much in press conferences, that this isn't the Republican Party he thought he was dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of genuinely being surprised that he wasn't able to, he did make some deals. He did get a big bipartisan infrastructure deal through. He did, he was able to pull a few deals, but I think he's realized over the course of the 3 years that regardless of whatever legislative wins he was able to get, there's something just purely rotten about this Republican Party that he didn't realize coming in. And for him to be able to break out MAGA Republicans and take aim at MAGA Republicans, but not necessarily the old sort of establishment Republicans, who I would argue have been equally as complicit in letting Trump, ruin their party. But I think for Biden, that gave him an opportunity to kind of bifurcate, you know what I mean? To be well, there's this group of Republicans that's really rotten, but there's still a group of salvageable Republicans. And I think that was helpful for him. I want to say, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just to add, I actually originally, when he started talking about MAGA Republicans, I thought it was a mistake, because exactly that, it gave an out to a lot of those other Republicans. But what ended up happening that I think validates Biden's approach is that there's a lot of Republicans like our frequent guest, Sarah Longwell, that needed that permission. Had he basically said all you Republicans are like Trump, then they had to clump together for safety, right? They had no choice. But by sort of providing that fig leaf, and again, these elections are so tight that if you pull 5-10% from the Republican Party, so it's not these anti-Trump.
In some
Republicans,
cases, if you pull 2 or 3%, I mean, in some cases, it's like that slim.
It's not a lot of them, but we don't need a lot of them. We need to peel off 10, 15. No, you're right. It could be 3% depending on the district. I mean, there's a lot of. We would have control of the House if at the closest 5 races had gone the other direction. I mean, it was that we lost so many races by hundreds of votes in the double and triple digit number of votes. So yeah, absolutely. And so and I think it made Biden himself feel better. He wasn't attacking his old friends that he hung out with, and the MAGA crowd. That's not his friends, right? He was already in the White House at that point. He didn't have relationships. But yeah, it did give freedom to maybe some of those suburban college educated white voters who they're not really feeling great about Trump, about MAGA, but they've always been Republican. And changing party affiliation, it's a process. It's like changing your religion. It's not a thing that happens overnight. Changing your beliefs can literally create as much physical pain as losing a limb. I mean, this is like a real thing. And so you can't expect people just like, oh, okay, now I'm a Democrat because Trump, right? It's a process. I was a Republican. It took me about 3 years to go from Republican to Democrat in my early 20s. So I know firsthand what that feels like. So
I grew up in a Republican household. I mean, my father wasn't a crazy Republican. I mean, he eventually, by the end of his life, was voting for Democrats. He voted for Obama and for Hillary.
And it probably took him till the end.
Yeah, he still considered himself a Republican. He just wasn't that kind of Republican.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
and that's what Biden, I think, has created by creating like MAGA, which is still a majority of the Republican Party. It gives freedom to all these people. Go, yeah, that's weird because they're weird. MAGA is weird.
We've got like, I don't know, probably 6-7 minutes left. Okay. So I have an agenda. Can I play it out? Okay. The first thing I want to say is I know there was a lot of hand wringing about that CNN town hall, and for all of its failures as a journalistic endeavor.
This is Donald Trump getting.
Yeah. That we showed a clip of, right? Yeah. This is Donald Trump getting a free hour on CNN where he spewed lie after lie after lie. And the CNN host, Caitlin Collins, she tried to fact check, but, you just can't, like, it's an unfair competition. No, you just can't, you can't bring the scalpel of fact checking to a whole, like, Kool-Aid worldview. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way.
He literally doesn't care. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to say just one thing about that is, I know there's a lot of hand wringing about CNN, but in terms of what we got out of that, number one, it showed how ugly MAGA Republicans still are. Number two, it was an hour of attack ads. I mean, there is so much. Yeah, right. I mean, our producer is reminding me, of course, that he continued to defame E.G. Carroll, who he's been a jury found that he had sexually abused her and defamed her. He was found liable for that. And he did all sorts of other things. He was demeaning. He called Caitlin Collins a nasty person, and then the crowd cheered, and it was terrible. But that's an hour of attack ads for Democrats, especially if Trump ends up being the nominee. It just like Jen was saying a second ago about that debt ceiling ad, that does not play well once you give people a little bit of information about the debt ceiling. That is, it's fodder for going forward. One last thing. You're always interested in whether or not we can get Texas, Marcos. So we have a new entrant into someone trying to take aim at Ted Cruz and flip the Texas Senate seat to Democrat. It is a long, long shot. But man, did Colin Allred have a beautiful announcement ad. And we don't have the whole thing. It was like, 3 minutes or something. It goes into his whole biography background, up by the bootstraps, if that's even a thing, raised by a single mother. I think he's like a 5th generation Texan, then he ended up playing in the NFL. So he's this big guy. I mean, big guy. But let's just play the first minute of his announcement ad and then get your reaction to it, Marcos, and then we can sign out. Promise.
When I left the NFL, I thought my days of putting people on the ground were over. Then, January 6th happened. I remember hearing the glass breaking and the shouts coming closer. I texted my wife, "Whatever happens, I love you." Then I took off my jacket and got ready to take on anyone who came through that door. And Ted Cruz, he cheered on the mob.
"We will not go quietly into the night."
Then hid in a supply closet when they stormed the Capitol. But that's Ted for you. All hat, no cattle. When Texans were freezing in the dark, he jetted off to Cancun. He'll do anything to get on Fox News, but can't be bothered to help keep rural Texas hospitals open. Spends months trying to whip up phony culture wars, but not a minute trying to raise wages or lower drug prices. The struggles of regular Texans just don't interest him. Well, they matter to me, because those struggles are the story of my life.
What do you think? What do you think?
It speaks to the January 6th changed everything. I mean, certainly that creates a sort of permission. But, I mean, obviously, calling your opponent weird and creepy and a coward, I mean, those are things that are particularly devastating to any candidate. I mean, being called a dick is for a Republican is probably a badge of honor. Like they that's literally what they want to do, right? Because I triggered you. I triggered the libs. But being like, you're hiding in the broom closet.
I know. He hid in the supply closet. That was hilarious. I was like, I didn't even know that detail.
Should have called it a broom closet. That would have been even better. But with the mops. Coward with mops and buckets. But yeah, it's a long shot. He's gonna have all the money he needs. I mean, this is gonna be a situation. Now, of course, in the Florida Senate race in 2022, our candidate also had all the money in the world. She raised like $80 million and lost by like 20 points, right? So money's not determinative, but Colin Aldred is going to have money. Ted Cruz is not popular. He's actually very, very unpopular, even amongst Republicans. His own caucus does not really care for him, does not like him.
How close did Beto get?
What's that?
How close did Beto get?
Beto got 2 points.
2 points.
Yeah. So
in 2018.
So Cruz, it's not a presidential year. It's a little bit different dynamics. But again, I want to sort of remind people of the same things we've been talking about from 2 years. Abortion and democracy are going to be incredibly powerful issues. Now you're going to have an entire 2 years of abortion restrictions in Texas. And so the consequences are really sort of coming through. And in the midterms, we had very disappointing midterms in Texas. But a big part of that was just Latino voters are some of the lowest propensity voters, and particularly in midterm elections. So more of them will come out in a presidential year. And I've definitely seen there's a couple of conservatives that election observers that have been talking about that they're worried about Texas, and everybody makes fun of them, and but these are Republicans understanding that Texas has been trending blue. The midterm was not a great look for us, but if we can get a presidential year turnout, plus those suburban voters continue to move our way, I don't think Donald Trump loses Texas, but I think that Ted Cruz definitely runs good 4 or 5 points behind. And so if the presidential is close, we can win that Senate race. And that's probably the only realistic chance we have of winning any Senate seats next year. We have a very realistic chance to lose seats in West Virginia, Montana, Ohio. And so we need at least one place to play offense, and the other place is Florida. These are not great pickup opportunities.
No, they're not. They're not at all. But Florida's our only other. Rick Scott's seats.
Yeah, and given those dynamics with abortion and democracy and presidential year turnout and increased turnout with young voters, there is a outside chance. I mean, I would say Ted Cruz is obviously the favorite in this situation, but it's not outside the realm of possibilities. So I'm excited. He's off to a good start, I think. He looks like he can kick your ass, which is always helpful, combating that weenie
Can you
Democrat.
imagine him and Ted Cruz? Ted Cruz is such a lump of a man. Oh, God.
Just
Anyway.
beat him up anyway. Like, just accidentally run into him and knock him halfway across the room. I mean, this guy is he's like a linebacker, right? He's ginormous.
He's giant. Anyway,
And so it would be great. But yes, Carrie, that is the show. You let me close it out. Thank you so much. Thanks for getting Jen on the show. That was amazing. She's always such a good interview. Oh my God, she's great. Thanks, Walter, for producing the show. Thanks for Paul for helping behind the scenes. And thank you, the viewer, listener, reader, for being part of this Daily Kos movement for our democracy and working towards a future that does do all those great things that Joe Biden is talking about, where books aren't banned, where women have the right to choose. And not just women, because that Supreme Court decision also affects same-sex marriage. It affects access to contraception. It affects interracial marriage. These are all rights from that same decision that the Supreme Court just tossed aside in order to make abortion potentially illegal if a state decides to do so. Book burnings, bannings, and gun violence, all those things.
Gender transitions. Gender transitions. I mean,
to have you guys hand in hand in this fight, and it's a righteous fight. So thank you so much. Please let everybody know about our podcast, about Daily Kos. Spread the word. See you all next week.